Welcome everybody to my live. So in this live, essentially, I would like to cover abnormal movement, this abnormal movements in children, okay, and certain movement, looking at the movement disorders, okay, as well. So let me just double check here quickly. Um, movement disorders. Okay, so first of all, let's first speak about the different types of abnormal movements before movement disorders. Okay, so first of all, you get something called tics. Now, tics are essentially are described as sudden, repetitive, non-rhythmic movement or sound. Okay, so it's sudden, it's repetitive, it's non-rhythmic. Okay, and it can be movements or even sounds. And examples of that include eye blinking, so eye blinking, facial grimacing, throat clearing, and shoulder shrugging. Okay, it can be simple or complex, and the common diagnosis for tics is you get a transient tic disorder, chronic tic disorder. So transient is lasting less than a year, chronic is motor or vocal tics lasting more than a year, and then you also get Tourette syndrome. Okay, so you get tic disorder and Tourette syndrome. Okay, so it's multiple motor tics and at least one vocal tic present for more than a year. Okay, the next one is tremors. So a tremor is essentially quite rhythmic. So a tremor is described as rhythmic and it's oscillatory. Okay, of a body part. So, for example, hand tremors or even head nodding, like head nodding or the hands. Okay, so tremors can be resting, occurring at rest, action tremor, occurring with voluntary movement, or postural tremors. Now, the differential diagnosis of tremor, so you get an essential tremor. Okay, essentially, the essential tremor is familial and presents as a postural tremor. Okay, postural. So, okay, I just have to mention the different types. So you get postural tremor or postural tremor, resting tremor, and action tremor. So it's essential tremor, then you get a cerebellar tremor associated with cerebellar dysfunctions and worsens with movement. And then you also get a physiological, right? It could be physiological as well and enhanced by stress, fatigue, or stimulants. The next one is that of chorea, Now, essentially, chorea, um, it is irregular. Okay, so it's irregular, it's rapid, it's involuntary movements from one part of the body to the other. And examples include frigidity movements as well as dance like movements, right? So dance like movements. It affects the face, the hands, and the feet and can be exacerbated by stress or voluntary action. And you get three different types in child differential diagnosis of chorea is essentially Sydenham's. Hi, how are you? Good evening. Evenings. How are you? Good in yourself? I'm well, thank you. Good. Can I ask how long are you going to be in this room? I'm planning to go. It's 11:30. 11:30. Yes. Okay, okay. And what's your name? Rito. Who? Rito. It's good to meet you, Rito. Likewise, likewise. So, okay. So you get Sydenham's chorea. Okay, so Sydenham's chorea essentially is post-streptococcal associated with usually rheumatic fever, so acute rheumatic fever. You get Huntington's disease, right? Huntington's disease, which is a genetic disorder present rather in adolescence and adulthood. And then you get chorea acanthocytosis, which is very rare. The next movement disorder is that as atitosis. Um, okay, so atitosis is essentially slow. So it's slow, it is rhythmic, continuous movements, often affecting the hands and the feet, right? So it's hands and feet. So atitosis, it's kind of, whereas chorea is more like dancing, antitosis is more slow and rhythmic, continuous movements, right? And examples is involuntary twisting or turning of the fingers and toes, okay? So twisting or turning fingers plus toes, okay? And essentially it's common seen in conditions like cerebral palsy and can be mixed with chorea, okay? So it's CP is definitely in one of the differential diagnoses. So cerebral palsy often mixed with chorea, and then something called kernicterus, right? And kernicterus is associated with severe jaundice in newborns, affecting the basal ganglia. The next one is that of a dystonia. Dystonia. Okay, and dystonia is essentially is a sustained or intermittent muscle contraction. So it's either sustained or it's intermittent. It is a muscle contraction and kind of causes abnormal, often repetitive movements or postures, right? So repetitive movement or posture. So it's a muscle contraction. For example, torticollis. So for example, neck twisting. Okay, dystonia can be focal, affecting one part of the body. It can be segmental, affecting adjacent parts of the body, or it can be generalized, affecting the entire body. Now, the common diagnosis for dystonia, you get primary dystonia, secondary dystonia, in which there's definitely a brain injury, for example, trauma or a stroke, right? This is essentially genetic or idiopathic, okay? Or dopa responsive dystonia, which responds well to levodopa. Okay, the next type of movement abnormality or abnormal movement is the myoclonus. Now, myoclonus is essentially of a certain muscle only. So instead of dystonia, it can affect like a whole group of muscles. The myoclonus, okay, maybe I'll just do it here. So the myoclonus, essentially, it is a sudden, um, it's very sudden, it's not sustained, it's sudden. So it is a sudden, brief, right? Involuntary jerks. That's the key word. Involuntary jerks of a muscle or group of muscles. Okay. And examples include hiccups, sudden jerks during sleeps. Okay. And key points. It can occur as a single event or in series, can be triggered by movement or stimuli. And in terms of the differential diagnosis, you get benign myoclonus of infancy. So during infancy, it's kind of normal. And you can get something signs in epilepsy. So patients with epilepsy have epileptic myoclonus. The next type of abnormal movement is that of a spasticity. Let me just put it over here. So now, spasticity is essentially an increase in tone leading to stiff and awkward movements. Okay, now you have difficulty in bending the limbs and also exaggerated reflexes. So difficult to bend limbs as well as exaggerated reflexes. Okay, and then spasticity is often seen in cerebral palsy. It's very often seen in cerebral palsy as well as conditions affecting the nervous system. So spasticity. Okay, I don't see spasticity over here, but okay, it's fine. And then the last one is dyskinesia. uh, so dyskinesia essentially is a general term of abnormal involuntary movements. Okay, so abnormal involuntary movements. That is essentially abnormal movements, dyskinesia. The examples of those include twisting, writhing in terms of aketosis, or jerky myoclonic movements. Dyskinesis can cause medically those such TT psychiatric disorders or Parkinson's disease. Okay. Other things which I didn't yet speak about was what all of that. Spasms can get infantile spasms or hypercalcemic spasms. Stereotypies, which is repetitive purposeless movements seen otherwise health showed, and melismus is flinging movements often of the limbs, and that is often seen in hemibilismus. Okay, and I think I'm gonna make a note of bilismus. That could be important one in children. So it is flinging, flailing movements, right? Often seen obviously in the limbs. So that would be the bilismus, and the condition in which it occurs is a hemibilismus, right? Typically unilateral, so it's typically unilateral. So that is the hemibilismus, right? Due to a lesion in the subthalamic nucleus. Okay, so it's due to a lesion in the subthalamic nucleus. Okay, so cool. So that's it, everybody. Oh, yes. So that's abnormal movements. Now I want to speak about how to recognize certain movement disorders. Okay, and I'm gonna have to stop sharing because I have another screen to share. Um, okay, so in terms of the recognition of movement disorders, so how would you know that someone, okay, now has a specific movement disorder? So I'm going to start with cerebral palsy. Now, cerebral palsy, um, so this session, I'm specifically speaking about symptoms and signs, um, not mostly causes, investigation, and management. That's hopefully in another live. So symptoms of cerebral palsy includes delays in reaching motor milestones. So motor delays. So I'm just going to mention here motor delays, and essentially the motor delays include sitting, crawling, walking. Okay, child unable to sit, baby unable to sit, baby unable to crawl, baby can't walk. Right. Then also, it's getting quite hot in here. An abnormal muscle tone. Now, abnormal tone, and essentially it can range from an increase tone or a decrease in tone. So increased tone is usually stiff, or the baby can be floppy. Now, also based on symptoms, you have your involuntary movements, right? So involuntary movements, and certain involuntary movements include spasticity, so spasticity as well as dyskinesia. Okay, just see if I didn't miss anything. Spasticity and atitosis, right? Spasticity, and the main type of dyskinesia is that of atitosis, okay, which could occur in cerebral palsy as well. And then very poor coordination as well as poor balance, okay. Now, moving on to the signs of cerebral palsy. So, the signs of cerebral palsy essentially includes so looking at the legs. So, there is scissoring of legs, right? Scissoring of the legs when picked up. Then, in terms of crawling, right? Crawling, you have a symmetrical crawling and crawling and movement patterns are asymmetrical, and then difficulty with precise movements, right? Difficulty with precise movements, and that, for example, includes picking up small objects. Okay, and I'm thinking now it's more like a fine motor. It's more so it's more gross. It's both gross and fine, well, both gross and fine motor abnormalities. And patients with CP have both a physical disability as well. Later on, could develop an intellectual, a component of intellectual disability as well. Now, moving on to a syndrome called Tourette's syndrome. Okay, so the symptoms of Tourette's syndrome is that the classical is multiple motor tics. So multiple motor tics and multiple motor tics include blinking. Okay, so repetitive blinking or even head um, jerking. Okay, next one is vocal tics. So motor tics, and patient can also have vocal tics, and for example, grunting or repetitive throat clearing. Right. Now, in terms of the signs, so onset of tics before 18 years old. Before 18 years is indicative of Tourette syndrome. Tics can wax and wane in frequency and severity. Tics can change over time, evolving from one type to another. Okay, so the main thing for Tourette syndrome is tics. The next one is that of a dystonia. So I already spoke about a dystonia. You have involuntary muscle contractions causing better twisting movements. You have abnormal postures. Okay, let me just rather put it here in its fine. So for dystonia, you have involuntary muscle contractions causing repetitive or twisting movements, and there's also an abnormal posture component in which these patients tend to present. The movements may worsen with voluntary action of stress. You have associated muscle cramps and stiffness, and difficulty with tasks which requires fine motor skills. Okay. Now moving on to the next one, which is ataxia. Okay. So I already spoke about ataxia in another. I already spoke about ataxia in another. Basically, in another live. So essentially, it's a lack of muscle coordination during voluntary movements and unsteady vocal gait and difficulty with precise movements. And size is frequent falls, difficulty with balance and coordination, as well as a slurred speech. Chorea is essentially your irregular rapid movements from one body part to the next, including the face, trunk, and limbs. Movements can interfere with voluntary actions, and you have restlessness or fidgeting. Also spoke about the tremor, which is can be in the hands, arms, head, voice, other parts of the body. During movement or rest is just rhythmic involuntary shaking or trembling may worsen with stress or fatigue. Okay, and patients have difficulty when tasks require steady hands. And in terms of the myoclonus, it's the brief involuntary jerks of a muscle group or group of muscles, and the jerks can occur single or in series. Okay, and in tick disorders, we said now essentially ticks are mostly indicative of Tourette syndrome. Now, just to wrap off, the observation evaluation is essentially important in that of a clinical examination, getting the developmental milestones, tracking the child's developmental process to being a proper neurological examination, evaluating the muscle tone, the reflexes, as well as the coordination. Image test includes MRI, CT scan, and genetic testing if needed. And when to seek help for warning signs is if a child shows persistent or severe symptoms, delays in reaching developmental milestones, or if disorders interfere with daily activities or cause distress. And that's it, everybody, for abnormal movements and movement disorders.